In this recording, I'm going to discuss three functions that Excel includes that combine statistics, count, sum, and average with an if statement, allowing us to count certain rows, but only if they meet a condition, to add up a bunch of numbers, but only if the rows meet a certain condition, and finally to average a bunch of numbers, but only if they meet that certain condition. The worksheet that I'm using is GPA Calculator. That's the same one I've been using in all the other recordings. If you haven't been following along, that might be a bit of an issue, but it shouldn't be too bad. About the only thing you need to do is in grade records, you need to calculate these points earned, which is simply credits times points. Mine's a little more complicated because of one of the other recordings, but it's basically credits times points per credit. That one you'll definitely need. Now, before I start my functions, one of the things I need to plan ahead for is recognizing what the name of this table is. I'm going to click on the name or click on the table and see that it's called student grades, and the student ID column is called student ID for obvious reasons. The reason I'm looking for this is when I go to the student report, I want to count how many classes each student has taken. When I count the number of classes, I'm going to use COUNTIF, and I'm going to use one of the dialog boxes. When I use the dialog boxes, I cannot get at these names for formulas because they're in the other worksheet. Right? The only formulas that are available to me here are the ones that are defined, or the only names that are available to me, are the ones that are defined in this worksheet. So I know the other one was called, the table was called student grades and student ID. What I want to do now is do something similar to a lookup, just a little bit different. I want to count all the records that have this student ID in that student ID column. So basically we're going to go in here and we're going to find all the fives and count them. There's 3 of them, so we can look ahead. Similar to the lookups we did here, but not exactly the same. So for the classes taken, I'm going to create my COUNTIF function. I'm going to go to my functions list, and COUNTIF is already most recently used for me because I've already tested it, but if you know the name of the function, just type it in up here and it'll find it for you. If you know the name of the function, we'll do this with some of the other ones. With the AVERAGEIF, you can just type it in the formula bar and save yourself a little bit of trouble. Again, that range name that I want is not available. I want the student ID column, the entire column, from that student grades table. So I'm going to type in student grades, and it recognizes that, I can see, but I don't want all of them. I just want the student space ID column. And remember the square brackets, we saw that earlier on, and now that I've got the square bracket in there, I see all the different values. We learned about this in one of the earlier, I think it was 5.1, where we talked about data table formulas. You can reference columns, entire columns in a table, by giving the table name and then the column name. Excuse me. Finally, we need the criteria. I want this student ID value to be equal to this cell, so just click on it. And I get my look, and we expect 3, so I click on OK, and sure enough, I get 3. Let me redo that. There's an alternative way. I'm going to do it up here this time. I'm going to say equals COUNTIF, and now that I've got a little experience, I know there's 2 things that I need to provide. I need the student grades, and notice if I'm typing formulas here, I get a little bit of help. There's my student grades, and I need the student ID column, and once again, I'm getting help. Press tab, square brackets. Okay. The second thing I need to provide, and we can see it underneath as well, is the criteria. Okay. Instead of simply pointing to this cell, sometimes your criteria are greater than, are not equal to, are any of those kinds of things. Okay. If you need to include one of those, as you saw just a minute ago, if all you're doing is checking for equality, I want it to be exactly this, and all you have to do is put the cell reference there. If, however, you want greater than, in this case I'm going to use equal to, you must surround the criteria with quotation marks. This is a little weird. Normally criteria don't get quotation marks, but in all of these functions, COUNTIF, SUMIF, AVERAGEIF, you surround criteria with equal signs if they include one of these operators like equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, etc. Should give us the same result. Nope. Oh, because that's a cell reference, and then things get even more complicated. All right, so if you're doing equal to, don't bother with that. If there's a cell reference, you have to actually do this. I'll show it to you. I have to add the B3 out here. And now it works. So that's kind of complicated. Luckily for us in this one, at least, in this example, we're only doing equality, so I could just leave that out and just put in the B3. But if you needed greater than B3, you'd have to put the greater than sign in quotes, concatenate. That was also something we did, I think it was in Unit 3 or the third recording. Okay. And then finally, the cell address. The book discusses this briefly. The book often goes into, give me a list of all the customers who sold more or who bought more than $10,000 worth of products. And they just type the 10,000 right into the formula. Then you would say greater than 10,000, that whole thing surrounded with quotes. All right, got that working. So that's COUNTIF. It only counts the records where the condition is true, and the condition is where the student ID, because that was our range, right, where the student ID contains this value. Now I want to calculate the total credits that this student has taken. Here we just typed in a sample value to make sure that this worked, but instead now I'm going to use the total credits means SUMIF. And so I'm going to take that out and I'm going to go to functions and I'm going to look for SUMIF. There it is. SUMIF has three criteria. The last one is optional. In our case, we're going to have to use it. It's optional if the range that you're looking in is also the range that you're adding up. So that example I had before, customers who bought more than $10,000 worth of stuff, how much did they buy? If the number is more than 10,000, then add it to the total. It's all in the same range, so you don't have to specify it twice. But more often than not, you'll have to specify the sum range as well. So my range here is the same as it was before. I want to find all the students in the student grades table with the student ID that I entered. This student ID. So this is the column that I want to search for this value. What's the criteria? Again, it's B3, and I could go through that complicated stuff, but B3 makes it easy. So this says, look in this column for all of the rows that have a student ID of this value. Okay. And then what should we add up? I want to add up all of their credits. So once again, I have to type the formula in here, student grades credits. And down here's my answer. This student is taking 7 credits, and that's normal for the data that I entered. They took 2 3-credit classes and 1 1-credit class, so that's the number that I expect. So when you're using SUMIF, you need typically provide three pieces of information. Where am I looking for this criteria? So those 2 pieces. What am I looking for? Where am I looking for it? And then what do I add up? If what you're looking for is also in the same range, you can skip it, but in this case, they're in 2 different columns. Click OK, and there's my sum. And now I want to do the same thing basically for my total grade points. This time I'm going to type it manually. Equals SUMIF, parentheses. I want it from my student grades, getting help, square brackets, student ID. Second piece of information, what am I looking for? The student ID. And which column do I want to add up? Student grades. Points per credit. If you're hearing rumbling, I'm typing this in the middle of a thunderstorm. Oh well. So this time I'm adding up just a different column. Concept is the same, but you can see if you type the formulas manually, you get a little bit of help with the table names and the column names, and that can make life a little bit easier. But then it's your job to remember what's required, or at the very least learn to read this thing underneath here and find out what you're supposed to enter. Square brackets here, by the way, mean that this is optional. Parentheses, enter, and this person is in those 3 classes, earned a total of 6.66 points. Okay, so the last type of formula we can do is average if, and that doesn't really figure in here very well because the average of the GPA, even though it's a grade point average, is not calculated exactly the same as other averages. So I'm just going to do a simple average if formula here. Average if works exactly the same as SUMIF. You need to provide it 3 pieces of information. Where's the data that I'm comparing to the criteria? Student grades, student ID. Press tab, square bracket, student ID, square bracket, comma. What do you want? This student ID number. And finally, what do we want? The average of, again, the student grades grade points. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. Points per credit. Or let's just do credits. On average, how many credits did I take in every class that I took? 2.33, again, it's 7. Most of these people took 3 classes, so that's exactly what I expect to be. What I expect it to be. That's just for demonstration purposes. The good news is AVERAGEIF, SUMIF, if you understand one, you understand the other. The concepts are the same. The only thing that's different is you calculating an average instead of a sum. But again, only where the ID meets this criteria. If I change this to 1001, then everything updates. This person got 12 grade points and so on. Last thing I want to do is calculate the GPA. GPA is an easy calculation once you have this information. We simply take this, divide it by that, total credits, and that gives us our GPA. I'm not sure that sounds quite right, but let's take a quick look at what 0001 did. 001, he should have a higher GPA. Something's wrong with my formula. Total points should be 12. Total credits is 7. Oh, I didn't want these points. I wanted the total points earned, so that's my problem. Here's the total grade points. This should be not points per credit, but credit earned. So there's the problem. Points earned, enter. Earned 28 points, and his GPA is a 4.0 because he got all A's. Let's go back to 1005 here. And that person earned 15 points for a grade of, or GPA 2.19. Let's check this, 15 points. This is always a good thing to do when you write formulas. You should expect certain answers, and if you don't get what you expect, try to figure out what's wrong. And if you're not sure what to expect, that's its own problem because you don't know necessarily how to test this. So this is student number 5. He's got 15 total points. Student number 5 is right here. And he got a C plus, a C plus, and a C, so I expect his GPA to be a little higher than a C. Right? And so here's a 2, here's his total points, 6, 12, 15, looks like a little more than 6, 12, 14, 15, so that number is correct as well. Okay, so there's our GPA, and all we have to do, and notice the name has changed, the degree has changed, everything automatically updates. That's SUMIF, COUNTIF, and AVERAGEIF.